Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Rob Kendall joining us. Rob, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
So Rob, for those who aren't familiar with your work, just take a moment and share what you do.
I am based and live in the UK. I work primarily with leaders who are facing complex, audacious, or even impossible looking challenges. And for me, that's my idea of a good time. And I've been very fortunate to turn it into a career.
Oh, you certainly have. I mean, your clients include AT&T, Burberry, American Express, British Gas, Lloyd's, Shell, Virgin. I mean, it's like an A to Z or A to Z of many others. And I really want to explore how you got to where you are. But before we do, let's start by looking at your early years. Before becoming a consultant, what were you doing?
Well, if I go all the way back, I lived in 15 different homes in my first 20 years on 5 different continents. So for me, I grew up in this sort of environment of continual change. The challenge I faced when I was growing up was that I was shy, introverted. I went through that horrible time as a teenager where you feel that you just wish the earth would swallow you up a lot of the time. And so my biggest challenge was the way I communicated with people. And actually my first career was as a professional artist. I was untrained, but it was something I really wanted to do. And the core theme, I think, of my career has been about expressing creativity. And then really for my own self-development, I started to do some work that was focused on the whole area of communication, mainly because I was so poor at it. And over a period of time, I worked for an educational company where I was sort of leading programs that focused on communication. And then some friends of mine said, listen, we're doing this project in the UK. It's a huge project. They were actually a US-based consulting company. And they said, come and join us. And, I never grew up with a picture in my mind that I would end up as a consultant. You think of all of those things you might want to be, and that just didn't show up. And I thought, why on earth would I want to do that? But they said, come and see what we're up to.
Rob, why do you think that they invited you to join them? I mean, you studied communications, but before that you were an artist. I mean, what do you think they saw in you that you were able to bring to the table or add in terms of value that they wanted you to join them?
Well, I think at that point I was already leading a lot of communication programs. I was quite used to being in front of a room. I would have 30, 40, 50 people every week or month that I would be in front of. So I think I had, by that point, developed that skill.
Got it.
Of being able to be in front of a room and kind of unfold a conversation, not quite know where and how it was going to go. And, that didn't happen overnight for me. That was over a period of really years of trying to learn the art and the skills of communication and to challenge myself as somebody who felt they didn't grow up with any natural talent to be able to do that, do it well and do it professionally.
So I want to continue really exploring the growth of your business and your professional career. But before we do that, I'm just very curious. What took you to 15 different homes or locations in your first 20 years?
Well, my dad was in the military and he wanted to take all the sort of far out postings. So we lived in Europe, we lived in the States, we lived in Asia, we lived in Africa. And, for me, it was an amazing experience growing up to experience very, very different cultures, people of different faiths, different backgrounds. For me, that was an amazing grounding, actually, for what I've ended up doing since then, really working all over the world, going back, actually, to many of those countries.
When you came back to the UK, did you feel yourself, and maybe even now, as a UK citizen, or did you feel more just like an international citizen?
Well, it's a great point because people would always say to me, where'd you come from? And I was stuck, I was like, well, I don't know. Which one do I pick? So that was always a difficult question. So as you say, I think I felt much more like an international citizen than somebody who came from one place.
Yeah.
And actually, part of that story, when I was 18, I went out and I worked in India, and I worked with amputees who'd lost legs and arms. A lot of them worked on the railways or as lorry drivers. And, I
Wow.
remember going there my first day thinking, holy smoke, what have I got to contribute to these people? I come from a middle class background in the UK. I just can't think of anything I can offer. But I realized over a period of months that just listening to them and their stories, being alongside them, being there for them, that we developed these incredible friendships, often using sort of sign language and
Right.
very broken English. And for me, I learned more than anything the power and the art of listening. And for me, that's probably the most important thing I've used of anything at all in my consulting career, is not going in and having answers and trying to pretend that I'm a know-it-all. It's actually being able to listen.
Yeah, that is such an important lesson right there. It's timeless. It's extremely powerful. You and I share, I think probably more than either one of us knew coming into this conversation. I certainly didn't spend time in 15 countries in 20 years, but I grew up at a young age. My parents took me from Toronto to Israel. And so my first kind of few years in first language was Hebrew. I grew up in Israel. I was surrounded by a lot of different religions and cultures and people, and just had a real appreciation for that. And then coming back to Canada next time in Vancouver, being surrounded by a lot of people from Asia, for me is something, initially I felt like an outsider, and I had a lot of challenges because I didn't speak the language. I didn't really know anyone or get it. But looking back, that was such a gift. I think it's really made me who I am. And as I've then gone and spent time and, for example, built a business in Japan years later and learning the Japanese language, like what you're saying about listening is so critical. Is I think one thing that gave me a bit of an advantage in learning Japanese and being able to build a successful business there was just listening. It wasn't going in, it wasn't just talking and trying to say, like, I know what's happening here and I can show you, but rather just really listening. So I think for everyone who is just tuning into this, like this one point of listening, if you really embrace it and you become very good at it, it can help you to grow your business probably more than any other tactic or strategy out there. It really is a timeless principle. So I want to thank you for sharing that.
Well, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, no, when you're talking before, it just really resonated. So let's come back now. You've been called upon by some friends you had, this American consultancy. They wanted to bring you into a project. So would you consider that your real first client, kind of getting involved in consulting?
Yes, absolutely. And it was sort of a challenging time. They had this huge client in the UK, and then 2 weeks after I arrived, various things happened, and the whole project closed.
Mm,
So then I was in the UK working for an American company that didn't have any work in the UK. So that was the start of my consulting career. And actually, for a while, it was, I didn't really have any particular connections to call on. It was me cold calling companies in the UK using the INSEAD yearbook of one of the directors of that company, saying that she graduated at the same year as the people I was calling, and saying, could I talk to them about consulting projects? And it was certainly a very hard start to my consulting career. And actually, if nothing else, I learned that when I started my own business, I never wanted to do it that way.
So break down for us, Rob, like what were you actually doing step by step? I mean, this was your first approach or first kind of activity towards getting clients and building a business. What were you actually doing there?
Well, at that point, I mean, I was also working for this company elsewhere. I was working with them in the States more, but when I was in the UK, I was cold calling companies. I was saying, this is who I am. I work for this organization. Could I talk to you about us working with you? And, I would do a little bit of research on them.
Hmm.
But to be fair, one, I hated it.
Yeah.
Secondly, the conversion rate was terrible.
Did you actually get some business that way?
At the time, I think I probably didn't.
Okay.
I mean, the ratio of time and investment to work was pretty terrible. Maybe it was just I was bad at it,
Mm,
but it was difficult. We were selling huge transformation reinvention programs, and trying to do that by cold calling was just not the way to go. I think that's important, Michael, because when I then sort of had a choice, do I go out and live in the US with my young wife and young family, or do I set up on my own? And I think when I set up on my own, my commitment was to do it a different way.
So what did you do in those early days? What was the different way that you ultimately found to be more effective?
Well, I think there was one other thing to say, which was, I was working for a great company, the company in the States, but as they grew and they grew very rapidly, I used to sit in meetings with them talking about billable days and how many billable days we had to do a month. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, the main observation was that it was moving away from just being in organizations to make a difference. And it was so much more about turning the wheel of revenue and profit.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I started on my own, I said, right, I've got one theme here. And actually, for me, this has endured for the last nearly 25 years that I've had my own company. And I said, it's all going to be about partnerships for life. That's what I called it. And it was about creating deep, profound partnerships, working with people that I truly respected, who were making a difference and who were taking on impossible challenges. And, I was fortunate. My old company said, listen, we've got some other possible work in Europe. And they let me do a bit of that where they had it. And then I got one client and I said, okay, my one job here is to create enough value that hopefully they ask me to stick around and do some more work. And that's really then how it's built from one project to the
Well,
next.
so let me ask you about that. I mean, you do great work. That client then continues to request your services and you continue to serve them. But how does that one first project or one kind of first client that you had established as your own turn into the next one? Like, what were you actively doing? So I know we're going back here many years, but what did you find to be at that early stage most effective in actually generating more leads, more inquiries, and more opportunities?
Well, I think I was particularly lucky that my first sort of big client was a company that was launching a new business. They said, right, we want to invent a whole new world of banking, online financial services. It didn't really exist at that point.
Mm-hmm.
They then went on to build £1 billion business in 3 years. And for me, being part of an organization that was growing and developing that quickly, that was full of bright, young, brilliant people, like-minded, to be right at the heart of that with their leadership team and so many different, I worked right the way across that entire business in the end for about 8 years. And one, that gave me an incredible grounding. But then, of course, as that business got bought and evolved and so on, those people went everywhere and scattered across the world. And then, sure enough, I would receive a telephone call saying, listen, I pitched up somewhere else and could we have a chat? And, I've got an interesting challenge here. And really, that's happened for 25 years now.
Right. So it's that you've created these lifelong relationships and partnerships as you've called it. You've focused on adding a lot of value. And then as some of those players, those kind of people, clients you had relationships with went to different organizations, they would call on you. And that's really what brought you in and continues to bring you into different companies. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Let me ask you this question, Rob. I mean, at that early stage, so yes, you had this connection to this larger, more established US consultancy. But for this bank or this financial institution launching, this massive new endeavor, why do you think they called on you? I mean, if they could have gone, and I'm guessing they could have gone to a lot of other companies or a lot of other people or consultants, what do you think they saw in you that they wanted to bring you in to their organization to help them to grow this?
Well, I think so often with these things, it starts with one small request. So I think in their case, they had a very young IT director. They had a huge challenge. They had to invent the technology. It didn't already exist to develop this business. And they said, can you just come in? It was literally for a day or two, work with the IT director and his team. So
Mm-hmm.
it really started there. And as a product of that, then he was a brilliant man. I worked with him over the next few years. And then the finance director said, listen, I've heard about what's going on over there. So why don't you come over and work with my team?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, then the chief executive said, well, I want to get all of our top 50 or 100 people together, and we want to invent the whole strategy for launch and the assumptions we're going to work off and so on. And then really one thing led to another. So
Got it.
I think for me, the focus was always on just provide value in what's in front of me. Don't get too far ahead of myself, and trust that if I provide value, then there will be more work. I don't have to force anything. I don't have to sell anything in. So I think, again, I've been very lucky that I don't really feel like any of the work I've done at any point I've had to particularly go in and sell myself. I think hopefully it's from people saying, I heard about other work that you've done, and could we have a chat? And then it goes from there.
So, Rob, I think you're being very humble in saying that, you were just lucky, that clearly there was some intention here and confidence that you were bringing to the table. I think looking back, it might be easier to say that you were just focusing on value and that you trusted things would work out. But for a lot of people who are listening to this, they might agree, like, yes, focusing on value makes sense and creating lifelong partnerships makes sense. But in those early stages, or even for someone who's been building a consulting business for quite some time and they've maybe relied on referrals in their network, things have gone well, but now all of a sudden it's kind of like the roller coaster drops and that referral well or their network has started to dry up and they're looking for that next big piece of business. They're looking for just more leads and inquiries to come in. It's hard at that time to just trust that things will work out and really have like a long-term view of adding value and serving and hoping that that will turn into business. What gave you the confidence? What mindset did you have that allow you to really act that way and to believe that just by adding value, business would come? I mean, weren't you concerned that maybe it wouldn't come and maybe that you need to make more conscious or consistent offers to win business faster? What was going on in your mind at that time?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Well, I think it's a very good question, Michael. And I think, if you go back right to the beginning of the story for me, it was about, I've already spent my life, my professional life, exploring the skills and practices of effective communication. So that is my core thing. And I suppose one of the things I set out to do was to be really, really expert in that area. So I think one of the things that's happened is in companies, organizations, where they've had a particularly difficult challenge or problem that they've not been able to resolve, they've said, right, we want somebody who can come in and help us do this. Mm-hmm. If they're saying, okay, we need to imagine the future and we need to invent what that looks like, then they've called on me to do it. Or if they've, for instance, had relationships that have been terrible, they've brought me in to do that. So I think part of it for me has been, yes, you're right, has been about referrals and trust and so on. But the other thing has been a relentless commitment to have an area which I could excel in. Mm. So that's really what I spend my life researching, growing and developing. I still spend probably 3 months a year trying to improve myself in my own skills and my research in that area.
How do you do that?
Well, I spend quite a chunk of my year doing research work. So I speak and write quite a lot. I've taken time out over the last few years to write a couple of books, and those in themselves have been an extraordinary process of development for me.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, I think, what I love about my work and my job is every day it's putting me out there in organizations with people in difficult situations, often in different parts of the world, where it refines and develops my own skills in speaking and listening. And so a lot of that has been developing my skills on the job. So, I think if I look at what's allowed me to be successful, one, I've been very determined. I work hard, have always worked hard. Secondly, I have been committed to develop a set of skills where at least my aspiration is to match anybody working in that area. Thirdly, my view or my aim at least, always been to deliver more value than anyone else, and also at what I would hope is considered to be a reasonable fee, so that people want me to stick around. And then, the other thing is this whole idea around relationship and partnership. So for me, if I'm not delivering value, then I will get out of there. I don't want to be in an environment where I'm not making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you're right to challenge me, because that's easy to say now when I've been doing it for many years. But I think in the early days, I must admit that did take a reasonable amount of courage. And I think the reality of it isn't always that easy.
I'm sure, yeah. So you mentioned your kind of pricing and fees. As demand for your services has increased and kind of changed over the years, how has your pricing model and fees shifted, if at all?
Well, I have increased them at certain points. So they have changed and gone up over time. And I do some more work now through other associates. I do some work more on a license fee basis. But I think what I've always tried to keep my attention on is fees where people wouldn't just say, right, get him in and get him out as quickly as possible because he costs so much money. So a lot of the companies I've worked in, some of them I've worked in for 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that's always been on the basis that people would feel, actually, that's good value for money for us. And therefore, there's always more work around.
And how do you approach your fees? I mean, are you looking at the value that is being created in the project and then basing it off of that? Are you looking at an hourly rate or the amount of time, kind of daily fees or daily rates in terms of your involvement? What kind of structure have you found to work best in your business?
Yeah, I tend to work on the basis of daily rates. So that's been always the main thing for me. But then, I think as time's gone on, as I've been able to develop offerings, then there are other ways I've found of being able to develop income. So as I say, some of it is through associates on other pieces of work, and then some of it is now providing offerings that I can do on a license fee basis.
Yeah, talk to us for a moment about that. I mean, when you say on a license fee basis, what does that look like and what are you referring to?
Well, I've just been working in an airport and still work in an airport. They've been really looking for something that is a whole program and initiative that supports people's health, safety, and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working with a really brilliant psychologist over about sort of 7 or 8 years now. And together we've developed a program that focuses on the nature of decision-making and the nature of the brain and so on. And as part of that, we have trained a whole number of people in that organization so that they then are delivering a shortened version of that program across 3,000 or 4,000 people in that organization. And then we have a license fee arrangement that allows them to be able to do that.
Got it. Do you consider yourself to be an independent consultant, Rob?
Yes, I do. And I guess, Michael, the thing for me that's been interesting is, I've always had this choice around to what extent do I try and grow an organization and a big consulting company or not. And I think for me, I got clear very early on what works for me, which is one of my main motivations in life is to have an experience of freedom. Mm-hmm. And it's that freedom to say, okay, I'm going to take 3 months off and I'm going to write a book this year, or to do work on a pro bono basis just because I really believe in what I'm doing, which I've done at various points. So for me, my view, my frame, I'm not saying it's the right one, has been to develop an almost zero cost business. I've got brilliant consultants who I trust entirely, or associates, I trust them entirely. And so I can pass on work to them. And then it just gives me an enormous amount of flexibility. I earn as much as I want or need to, but then I have a lot of freedom to work when I want and as much as I want.
And when you're working with those associates or passing them work, is that typically on kind of a revenue share basis? You're capturing a percentage of what they bill so that you're still earning even while they're working? Or are you just simply referring business to them and that's it?
No, it's the former. So
Got it.
I earn from when they're working. And they have other businesses that they run. So they're not employees of mine. They're not dependent on revenue from me. But at the same time, they often welcome work, and I'm happy to pass it on. It works for them and it works for the clients.
Right. So it sounds like between working with associates, creating products or services that you're now kind of licensing, you've found ways to continue to kind of scale and grow and benefit from leverage, even though you are still running your business essentially as an independent consultant.
Yeah, that's right. And again, Michael, for me, it's very much a choice that I've often seen consulting companies where people set out, loved the work they were doing with clients, but then ended up over a number of years managing the business and sort of fell out of love with it. And for me, I got really clear what I love is working directly with clients and the experience, hopefully, of being able to make a difference with them and being alongside them. And so I've constructed my business in a way that still allows me to do that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
To do that in a way that hopefully I can do it largely now at this stage on my own terms.
Yeah, I think, there's, in my kind of experience and observation, Rob, there's no right or wrong model or way to necessarily run a consulting business. It really comes down to what each owner, each consultant, each entrepreneur wants to get out of it. But you're right, so many people follow what they maybe just see or hear others doing, even though it may not be the right model for them. So I agree. It's very important to figure out what is meaningful for you. What do you really want to create? And then to figure out what is the best model and path, to support that and get you there. What would you say, Rob, is maybe one of the biggest mistakes that you see consultants making that if they were to correct or to approach from a different way, they would get better results in their business and in their work?
Well, let me give me an example this week. I had a telephone call yesterday from an organization in the UK. They're over 300 years old. They're a household name. And they said that they wanted to do some work with their executive leadership team. And they said a consulting company came in last year and did some work with them. And they said they were really delighted with the work. They said it went really, really well. So obviously my question was, well, why haven't you carried on?
Yeah.
And they said, well, the problem is, they said, this organization, one, they said they had their model and they wanted to push their model. And secondly, they said they just didn't like the fact that they felt this company had this kind of motive that they, I think, presumably, I was reading between the lines, but they kind of kept wanting to sell in the next piece of their work. And for me, that I think is the biggest mistake. Really, I've always taken the view that I'm never going to try and sell in the next piece of work. My only insistence with an organization is that we have no contract and that they can stop the work at any point. And my deal with them is, all I ask of you is that you pay me for the work that I've done. End of. And for me, one, it keeps me on my toes. And secondly, it leaves them always free and never feeling obliged to continue work with me. So for me, that's almost the opposite of the situation I described, where I'm constantly trying to sort of bind them into the next piece of work. My view is I want you to always be free to choose me or not. So for me, that I think is often the biggest mistake. I'm in a situation now where I don't know whether I'll end up doing that piece of work, but it's really on completely different basis.
When you say that you don't use a contract, are you just referring to that there's no contract in terms of like the length of the project, that the organization yourself are agreeing to, or that you're not using any form of agreement or contract when you're doing business with clients?
Well, we might plan out a piece of work for a year,
Mm-hmm.
but I will work on the basis that if it isn't delivering value for them, they should stop it. And they're free to stop it at any point.
Okay, but you do have a written document that both parties sign in terms of nothing at all?
Usually not, no.
So nothing around confidentiality, nothing around terms or fees or intellectual property?
Usually not, no.
Wow.
So I might write them one document at the start that says, this is the basis on which I'm working. And there will be 4 or 5 lines in that say, this is the deal. The deal is that you pay me for work that I've done, that you give me 2 weeks notice if you want to cancel work, but you can stop the work at any point. That's it. And for me, Michael, that going back to this thing around partnerships and relationships, for me, that's it. You know, if they're not getting value, then they shouldn't have me there. If it's not working for me, then I should get out. That's it. That's the arrangement.
Rob, is any of your work going through procurement departments, or is it all coming from direct agreement and kind of signing of a check by the ultimate decision maker, the CEO or the executive kind of leader?
I think it's usually direct with the leader.
Yeah.
So maybe I should slightly correct what I said. Sometimes for pieces of work, they'll say, we need to agree a purchase order and we need to do that through procurement, and we will agree a purchase order, but nothing more than that. There's no further documentation. And there might be, talking about the licensing arrangement, you know, I have a couple of times said, let's draw up a simple licensing agreement. But I think my point, and this is really important, is for me, it's a relationship of trust.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm doing there. And that's what we're signing up to. And a relationship of trust says, right, we're going to stay in communication. If it doesn't work at any point, then that's something we're going to talk about. And, you know, I don't want anyone feeling obligated to keep me hanging around. You know, and I'm not just going to stay there for the sake of it because it's bringing in money. If I don't think it's making a difference, then I'll stop the work, I'll address that, and I'll go and work somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a great insight and experience that you're sharing here, because I think for many, they'll be seeing things in a different light. Not too often do we hear about consultants running their business in this manner, and clearly it's worked very well for you. So I want to thank you again, Rob, for sharing this with us. Before we wrap, a couple just quick questions here for you. What book are you currently reading or have you enjoyed reading recently?
Well, there's a fantastic book called Subliminal and another book called Incognito. And really what I'm studying at the moment is the nature of decision making, and particularly then how that shapes the way that we speak and listen. So for me, hopefully that's preparation for another writing project before too long.
Right.
So that's in my plans.
Great. We'll definitely share and kind of link up to those resources. The other thing I want to make sure about here, Rob, is that people can learn more about you and your work. So where's the best place for them to go to do that?
Well, they can go to my website, conversationexpert.com, or I would love people to read my books. So I've had 2 books that have been published in the last few years. The first book is Blamestorming. That's now out in 5 languages. And the second one is Workstorming, which is more about communication in the workplace.
Perfect.
Or I also write blogs for Psychology Today. So I'd love people to read anything I've written and give me some feedback.
Fantastic. We'll make sure that we link all of that up in the show notes. Everyone can go to consultingsuccess.com, just search for Rob Kendall. You'll then find, or go to the podcast page there, you'll find this interview with the transcript, as well as all the kind of show notes and links to everything that Rob has mentioned. I'll definitely be checking out those books as well and diving deeper into your work. Rob, I want to thank you again so much for coming on here. I've really enjoyed this conversation, learning about and just kind of hearing your story and some of the things that we share, but also the approach that you've taken, some that are very different, but have worked extremely well. I really do appreciate that.
Thanks very much. It's been great to speak to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.